Here we are on ninth lit, and we are practicing the first, we're practicing prologue, focusing on the first 8 lines. Everybody ready? All right, I'll count to 3. How about that? 1, 2, 3. One that April with his shower sort the drought of March hath pierced it to the rota, and bothered every vine, and switched liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the full. When Zephyrus eke with his sweeter breath, in spirit and every holden hath, the tender crappies, and the younger son hath in the round his halberd horse Irana, and smaller fowls making melody, that sleepen all the nick with open ear, so pricketh them nature her courages, then longing folk to go on pilgrimages. Where'd you go? Let's keep going.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Yeah.
Like, you pronounced ye. Yeah. Wait, what?
Let's keep going. Let's finish it. All right. And Palmer's for to seek a strange, to Ferney hallways, couth in sundry Londons, and specially from every shear's end of England to Canterbury they went, the holy blissful martyr for to seek that him hath holpen when that they were seeking.
Is it seek or seek?
I'm just trying to imitate the guy on the stove. If you said seek and not seeker, the thing is, one thing you have to remember about poetry, if you don't know how to pronounce a word in its poetry, then, well, for instance, let's see, saute and rote, or it could be sote and rote, but we know he says saute and rote. Rhyme helps you pronounce something. Like if you don't know how it's pronounced, look at the word that it rhymes with. And if you know how to pronounce that one, then the one that rhymes with it is going to be pronounced the same way. That's a little iffy, but we don't have time to do this much more. So keep working on it. Every day you need to practice it. And put it away if you would now, and get out your notes and turn to page 6 in the book. You have books. We have ordered books for the other classes. So we'll have enough for everybody to take home one. You're the only people that have been able to do that. The last 10 or 12 were so beat up I couldn't use them. So yes. Yeah, you can grab one of these. I believe we got all the way through. Did we get through the yeoman, or did we just start the yeoman? Do you remember? All right, well, we did the squire. Chris, tell me about the squire. The squire?
He was the king's son.
Not the king.
He was
The knight.
How was he different from his dad? Yeah.
because he was what's that name? It's where he like threw a lot of things. Yeah, Renaissance man, and he wore different colors.
So he was. You mentioned his age. He's his son.
Yeah.
So he's younger. All right. So he's younger. He has a different job. He's a squire, not a knight. He is a Renaissance man, and the way he dresses. So I think he's a great example of why the prologue is so popular, because you know people, you may be like this guy, you know, that this guy is a typical 20-year-old, covers all ages, all 20-year-old. If you met a teenager from Jesus' day, you would immediately have something in common, your age, and your heart. People are always the same. So we will move now from the squire to the yeoman. And I gave you this definition yesterday. You remember what it was? All right, so let me do it again. A yeoman, make sure you write it down. Can you remember it? Did you remember what I said? Did you remember what a yeoman is?
Yes.
Did he? You wrote it down, right? Okay, well, read it. What does it say? You wrote it down. Are we starting too early? Is that the problem?
Yeah,
We just
I
start
know.
class way
I've
too
had a
early.
bad week, but it's getting better.
All right. John Carter, you know what it means?
What?
What does yeoman mean? I gave you the definition yesterday. You wrote it down, right? Well, you got such a great memory, why do you have to write things down, right? Well, tell me what a yeoman means then.
I would love to, but
But what?
um,
Yeah. Wait a minute. Don't make Mariah say this again tomorrow. Write it down. Write it down. That if we think we're so got great memories and so smart, and yet we don't do the smartest thing is to listen to your teacher. So write it down. Yeah.
It's a social rank, and it's a person who owns a small farm.
That's all. That's half of yes. That's the first half of the definition.
Oh, I have that. I
Well, good.
actually have
Very
that.
good.
Look, right there, I have it.
Good.
One who
We're
owns a
so
small
proud.
farm.
Yes, Chris.
I wasn't paying attention.
one who that's
Chris.
Anyone who performs a noble service.
All right, so there are two sides of this definition. One is the simple social rank, as Mariah said, but it may be that you hear somebody say usually it's coupled with the word job or work or task. You did a yeoman's work. And that means it's a real compliment that you performed this great service, usually without a lot of attention and reward, but you did it for the sake of it needed to be done. Somewhere I read the line, somebody said that whatever war it was won by the yeomen of England. And so it sounds to me like that would be an honor to be a yeoman in England. So this guy, well, we don't have a name. Remember, most of the time we don't have a name, but this guy, you will recognize something about him. So, Becca, would you read about the yeoman on page 5, bottom of the page?
Where?
The yeoman. There was a yeoman.
Okay, yeah. There was a yeoman with him at his side, no other servant, so he chose to run. This yeoman wore a coat and hood of green, and peacock feathered arrows from the case. And neatly sheep hung at his belt the while, for he could dress his gear in yeoman style.
Yeoman.
Yeoman, sorry. His arrows never dropped their feathers low, and in his hand he bore a mighty bow. His head was like a nut, his face was brown. He knew the whole of woodcraft up and down. A saucy brace was on his arm to ward it from the bowstring, and a shield and sword hung at one side, and at the other slipped a jaunty dirk, spear sharp and well equipped. A medal of St. Christopher he wore, of shining silver on his breast and bore. A hunting horn, well slung and burnished clean, that dangled from a baldric of bright green. He was a proper forester, I guess. Do you want to keep going?
No, I'm looking up two words because they interest me. Anyway, you mentioned that he sheathed. That word was sheathed. So who does he remind you of?
I think like Robin Hood.
He does. I think Robin Hood, we don't know if he existed. I know the one story that I'm aware of that maybe introduced him, I don't know, but it was Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Robin Hood is a major character in that story. Now there are these stories of Robin Hood, but there wasn't like one book. You couldn't find a book called Robin Hood. I mean, you can, a modern book for children or something, but we don't know where the legend came from or if there really was a person. So this may be pre-Robin Hood. You know, this character in 1314 may have been the guy that came before Robin Hood. But anyway, that's all we know about him. I was looking up the word jaunty and saucy. I'll just show you. It says he has a saucy.
I know, I was thinking
Brace.
all of those words. They're
Yeah.
kind of like descriptive. He's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know what it makes me think of, but I can picture it. Sets a really good picture in your mind.
Well, the word saucy, he has a brace on his arm for the bow, the bow and the arrow and so forth. Saucy means impertinently bold and impudent. There's nothing else about him that seems that way, but his raised and then a jaunty, and I haven't been able to find that yet. I haven't looked it up yet, but anyway, that's it. Those little words do add a dimension to him. So we know about the Robin Hood-like guy called the yeoman. Why don't we go on? This is she takes up a lot of space here in the book, so he spends a lot of time with the nun. So why don't we go with yeah.
Can I read?
Yeah.
There was also a nun, a prioress, her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only by St. Lloyd, and she was known as Madame Eglantine. And while she sang a service with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly, and she spoke daintily in French extremely. After the school of Stratford at Bow, French in the Paris style she did not know. At Meath her manners were well taught withal. No morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lip so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen. Upon the cup when she had drunk to eat, she reached a hand sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways and strains. To counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all of her dealings, as for her sympathies and tender feelings. She was so charitably, so solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bleeding. And she had little dogs she would be feeding with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread. And bitterly she wept if one were dead, or someone took a trick and made it smart. Took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way. Her nose was elegant, her eyes black gray. Her mouth was very small, but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread. Always a span across the brows I own. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm. A set of beads, the gaudiest trickles tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of finest sheen, on which there first was a graven crown, A, and lower, Amor Vincit Omnia. Another nun.
Okay, why don't we stop there and we'll.
Sorry.
All right, so he spends 30, 40 lines, something like that, maybe, on this nun. So let's answer. Notice the question. Number 8 says, "What is a prioress? Describe her manners, personality, and appearance." I didn't give you a lot of room here, and I want you to write down a number of things, especially since you can't write in your book. So let's take a look at this nun. She's also a prioress. One of the things you learn reading the prologue, you learn what occupations there were. You learn names. So I'm going to give you a definition of a prioress. Ready? All right. So a prioress is, it's a woman who ranks next to the abbot in a convent. So she's the second ranking, highest ranking official in a convent. Now, what's a convent?
Is it like a house for nuns?
For who?
For nuns?
Yes. Well, for nuns. A monastery would be for monks. A convent for nuns. And so the highest ranking person would be the abbot. I guess that sounds like a man. But the second highest ranking person would be the prioress. So she's a important official, yeah.
Is the abbot a man though?
I was just going to say that. It sounds to me like the abbot is, but I don't know. Don't know how they handle that.
I thought only women were like supposed to be nuns.
Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't be a nun. But the nuns
Oh,
would be
as
kind of
like
subordinate to the,
old
you know, to
ladies
the
or
men,
something.
you can imagine, in the Middle Ages. All right, let's take a look at her. I want everybody in here to tell me one thing. I'm going to start over with John Carter. I want you to tell me one thing in order. Don't duplicate it. There's plenty here. So I want you to tell me one thing about her, starting with John Carter.
The abbot.
No, the prioress,
The prior.
the nun.
Would love to smile and was very simple and coy.
All right, we'll accept that. She was coy. That bothers me from the get-go. You know what coy means?
Isn't it like a little like, I think of shyish, but is it more like kind of
Hang on, keep going.
timid? Like you say a coy smile, it's kind of saying like
You're halfway there.
is it kind of like a sly?
Yes. Let me give you this definition. Coy can mean shy. I'll just give you the whole thing. It can be shy, cute, artful, kind of with an artful playfulness. It's a trick to attract attention. So the word coy is being shy, but it's a strategy of being shy. You're being shy, hard to get, as they say, in order to actually attract somebody. So it's not all that honest or genuine. Who are we talking about here?
The nun.
What?
Warrior.
Why is she trying to be cute or
Because
coy?
there's a man on the top.
Well,
Oh,
you will learn about this. I don't know the date, but you know, the church didn't always forbid men and women from marrying that worked there. They didn't always forbid that. There was a certain time where that came into vogue, but it's not always been that way. So it bothers me that here's this nun that's a little bit flirty. What do you want to say? Give me something else.
She spoke daintily in French.
Yeah, I don't know what we can say about that.
Well, like
She-
it said she doesn't speak Parisian French because she went to a specific school that taught another kind.
I don't think that's necessarily a criticism of her, but it's just part of the picture. Give me something else, Ian.
She was so charitably solicitous.
What does that mean?
I have no clue.
All right.
I just saw it in the book.
Yeah, well, that doesn't do us any good. Solicitous means careful or eager. Like if you study hard, if you're a hard worker, you could be considered solicitous. You care. There's a little bit of anxiety there too, but you care. You work hard at it. So she was so charitably solicitous. She used to weep if she saw. We got to keep it in context. She used to weep if she saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bleeding. And then it goes on to say she had a little dog she would be feeding with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread. She wept if one were dead. So the solicitousness seems to be concerned a little bit about animals and dogs and mice, and she just has a big heart for animals. It won't take you long to realize who doesn't she seem to care about.
People.
And
Men. I don't know.
Being
God.
it never mentions her relationship to God here, or
Maybe
she,
it's just assumed by her name that she is close to God.
Maybe
the more you read this, he doesn't mind that Chaucer doesn't mind identifying those people who seem to be true, living it out believers. He doesn't hesitate from that. So it's just interesting that, first of all, we've seen that she speaks French, very careful about French, got these little animals, she really cares about these animals. There were a couple of other things here, at least, yeah.
So she has I feel like something that contributes to her coy nature that I think is kind of un-nunly. That doesn't really make sense, but she has jewelry. So she has
what?
Jewelry.
Okay.
So she has like coral beads on her like,
So your entire outfit,
and she has like a
Like, wasn't the thing you
gold
can't
head.
have earthly
So she's
possessions.
just more,
I thought so.
I feel like nuns, like in the Sound of Music even, like it's very like strict, their dress code.
What do they wear? What do they call that?
A veil? or
A,
like
a habit.
Oh.
And it's black, and no, they're not concerned about their appearance. Everybody looks the same. It's like in the military. If one nun, you got one nun, you can see them all, you know. Your individuality is not that important, and she's going out of her way to express sort of her individuality. Now, again, the church has changed over the years, and Dr. Talbert can tell you more about that when he talks about, if he hasn't already, the development of the medieval church. There was a time when they could marry. So even Peter was married, you know, and he was the first pope. They claim he's the first pope. There's no real evidence of that, but I think they claim he's the first pope. But the apostles, Paul didn't marry, Peter did. So it's hard to, you know, it's really kind of a super or uber piousness that crept into this occupation, and she doesn't seem to be living that way. Yeah.
So why hasn't she been kicked out of the church though?
Who?
It's like, the trials.
Who said she was kicked out?
No, I'm saying, why isn't she?
Oh,
She's
what,
not
you
obeying.
tell me. If there's somebody appears to be breaking the rules and she's not kicked out, what does that tell you about the church?
It's corrupt.
It's
The
corrupt.
church is corrupt. Maybe those rules are real loose now. Nobody's really living by them. And I'm not saying those are good rules. I'm not saying that anybody who's a Christian should not marry or anything like that. That would be ridiculous. We wouldn't fill and multiply. The earth fill the earth and multiply. But if they're rules, they sure not obeying them.
Sponsor is married in this part, right?
Yes, very good. Good point. And a couple of other things, and anybody notice any other thing that strikes you is interesting? Can I point out at the bottom of page 6? How do you handle this? She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. What is about that description that raises some red flags?
Like, she's very entertaining, like.
Keep going. Keep reading.
Like, she's straining, like.
She's what?
Straining,
What do you mean straining?
that's just what it says.
Yeah, where does it say that?
Pleasant and friendly in her ways and straining.
Keep going.
Okay. To counterfeit a courtly kind of grace.
What does it mean when it says she counterfeits?
She's like faking kind
Yeah.
of like a higher air, and which probably would communicate like a pride.
Yes.
And like she's super prideful and arrogant, even though she's not in a place of nobility, but she's trying to make a name for her position.
And the very next sentence it says, and seem to dignify. What does the word seem suggest?
Like, still faking it.
Appears, but maybe not
Not
real.
actually.
Yeah. Notice that she is not a small person, and this is, you'll see this now with the monk in a minute. Your size in the Middle Ages would indicate your status, because if you were a large person, that means you ate well, and if you weren't a large person, that would mean you didn't eat well. And the only reason, and people aren't worried about diets in these era, you just didn't have the food. So a wealthy person was usually a large person, and it would indicate that he lived well. She is a large person. It says that she is no means undergrown. You see that? It's near the end of it. So that's a compliment. She was wealthy, yeah.
Also, it gives like quite a few lines on the way she ate and stuff. And
Yeah.
drank, and her
Good.
like table manners.
It even
all that,
describes that,
Which
yeah.
communicated like a higher, like she's on
Very
kind of
good.
a high horse.
Very
Shouldn't,
good.
like, nuns are not supposed to be, like, putting themselves up, but they should be putting.
Well, I think John Carter said, what, a minute ago? John Carter, what did you say they're supposed to do before they become nuns or monks?
Get rid of all their earthly possessions.
Or and earthly desires and earthly ambitions. And this woman does not seem to be doing that, which would indicate what we said earlier, that the church is going a little soft here. You know, they're not really living up to their. And notice the last line, the last three words. She has a brooch of brightest sheen, of which there first was a graven a crown A, and lower. And what did we say that meant? Hey, Leah, what does that mean? Look at it. Look, what does it mean? I can tell you what it means, but you've had Latin. You ought to be able to translate it.
Amor means love.
Right?
Right? Okay.
Any idea?
Oh, like, conquers all.
Oh,
Love conquers
you ever heard that?
Oh.
Love conquers all is usually a phrase that refers to romantic love, not agape love that you'd see in First Corinthians.
Nun.
Exactly. You see the discrepancy there. You see the incongruity there between her and her lifestyle. This is the first example. This is the first example we've seen of this style. What Chaucer is doing, he's describing exactly what he sees, but then he inserts kind of this editorial opinion, like it seems and it appears, and there's a counterfeit. So he seems to be able to read people real well. One thing about him, I know this is a character in a book, but just want to back up a minute. He said about himself, he got there before the others did to the end, and it says he had spoken to them all upon the trip, and was soon one with them in fellowship. Well, how could he describe them if he hadn't at least seen them and then spoken to them? You know, so he had to speak to them, and this always struck me as we're all different people, but just think about yourself a minute. When you go into a large group, are you a person who you don't know anybody? Were you somebody that would go up to somebody, a stranger, say, hey, how are you? I am, who are you? And all this. Are you that kind of person? Are you kind of stand back and wait for others to come to you? Well, a writer probably has to be somebody, if he's interested in people, and you can't write unless you're interested in people, he probably goes up to people. Chaucer seems to do that. He's the kind of person that would go up to people. And I just remember one example of this at Page, this guy who, the first day of school, freshman year, he goes up to some guy and because he didn't recognize him from middle school or something, he introduced himself, and they became, and I think the other guy was from another country, he was an exchange student, but they became kind of like big friends for the rest of the 4 years that they were there at Page. All because somebody had the courage, and he just cares about people, to go up and say, hey, how are you? I'm so-and-so. There's a risk there, but I don't know if he was a believer or not, but that's what believers do. That's ultimately, believers are not selfish. I'm a little afraid and nervous, but I think I ought to at least figure out who these people are. I ought to find out their names. I ought to call them by name. I ought to express some interest in them. And I just think that's something that's why this book exists, because Chaucer was that kind of person. You know, he cared about other people enough to ask questions. And by the way, the best way to carry on a conversation with somebody you don't know that well, ask them questions about themselves. Nobody likes to talk about anything more than, most of us like to talk about ourselves. Sometimes we don't. We wouldn't want to talk about ourselves in front of other people. But if it was just one-on-one, you're trying to get to know this person, make them talk about themselves. And then you don't have to ask anything else. You'll just start going, and we like to talk about ourselves. And so just a little clue, and you get to learn a lot that way. All right, so she's the first person I want you to remember. Really, the yeoman is really just his job. There's nothing about him. I like the squire. He's interesting. The knight's interesting, but I think she's really interesting. Not necessarily a good person, but she's an interesting person.
Is it in this book that the knight has the courtly love? Like, isn't he in like a courtly love kind of situation?
Well, he tells a story that's an adventure story. I can't ever remember reading it, so I'd like to read it. It's the longest tale in the story. You'll have to read it or look it up.
Because I was just wondering, because we had like a little class, or like one of our classes on Dante was talking about courtly love, and I think they brought this into that they brought Canterbury Tales into.
Okay, well, good. That's neat that one story speaks of another story. They kind of tying together. All right, who'd like to read next? We only have about 10 minutes, or we go to John Carter,
I have to ask what page though, I'm sorry.
page 7,
Oh, we're
the
still there.
page we ended on.
At the another nun.
Yes, and then keep reading.
Another nun, the secretary at her cell, was writing with her, and 3 priests as well.
Can I just pause and say, I don't know that he ever identifies those 4 people more. I don't, in the prologue, I don't think he goes any further than that. So even though they're 30 pilgrims, he doesn't go into the depth of like he just did with the nun in every case. I think there are about 23 or 4 that he goes into some decent depth about it. So this is now the monk, the male counterpart to the nun. Go ahead.
A monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. A manly man to be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle when he rode, a man might hear jingling, and a whistling wind is clear. And as loud as does the chapel bell, where my lord monk was prior of the cell, prior. The rule of good Saint Bennet or Saint Mar, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the thing of yesterday, and took the modern world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen, which said that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water flapping on the pier. That is to say, a monk out of his cloister, that was a text he held not worth an oyster. And I agreed and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round, poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin bade until the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf, let Austin have his labor to himself?
Excuse me, I was looking up a word. Okay, we just read about a prioress, right? This guy is a prior. Leah, you with us here?
Yes.
Okay. This guy is a prior. So he holds the same job in a monastery that the prioress holds in a convent. What did we notice about him? Why don't we go to, okay. Huh.
Well, I thought one thing that stood out to me, I underlined it, was at first he starts by saying that hunting was his favorite sport, and then down at the bottom of the page he says, he did not rate that text at a plus 10, which says that hunters are not holy men. So he's like kind of ignoring the rules that say like holy men being, a prior can't be a hunter.
Right.
But
And
he is a hunter, and that's
Yes.
his favorite activity.
yes. It says there, and he took the modern world's more spacious way. Yeah.
So it seems like he values like worldly stuff.
Yes,
and, like,
that's a good word.
spiritual and godly stuff.
Very good. That's a good word to describe both the nun and the monk, is they're worldly. What does it mean that he took the modern world's more spacious way? What do you mean spacious way? Yeah.
Maybe, I guess, I don't know, felt like the world had more to offer him, and like he felt kind of like, he found him claustrophobic in like the church.
And what you said, more worldly, use the word worldly. You remember what Jesus said about the road to heaven?
It was
Narrow.
It was narrow. So this is a little reference to, the road to heaven is narrow. The road to hell and the world is spacious. And he prefers that wide road. A lot more opportunity, he thinks, anyway.
Where is this that it says?
At bottom of page 7. And when you mentioned that the Bible basically says, it doesn't say the Bible, but that's what he's referring to, that hunters are not holy men. Just for your benefit, ever heard of Nimrod?
Yeah.
Nimrod, Genesis 10:8. So he was actually the one who founded Babel, the city of Babel and the Tower of Babel. But he was a hunter. It says he was the first great hunter. So Nimrod was a hunter. We had the offensive coordinator, football coordinator at Page High School. I'll never forget. I mean, he's still alive, and he's a friend. Name is Frank Starling. You would be on the opposite side of Page High School during football season, and you could hear Coach Starling yelling at his offensive lineman. He had the loudest voice, and he was constantly yelling at them. And the one thing he loved to call them when they messed up, he called them a Nimrod. And there's nothing connected between what he called, his intention, you're a Nimrod, and the name in the Bible. Nimrod was actually a pretty important guy, pretty powerful guy, but he used it as a negative.
I've heard that. So I feel like in
Yeah,
like
but-
cartoons and stuff, there
When you
people are
first
called.
said Nimrod, I thought you were talking about the insult.
Yeah.
Well,
same.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. I guess we could look it up. Where did you finish reading?
I finished reading, Let Austin have his way with himself.
All right, so we need somebody else. We're still on the monk. Yeah, thank you, Mariah. This monk was therefore a good man.
This monk was therefore a good man's horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun, he spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine gray fur, the finest in the land. And on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold, cunningly fashioned pin. Into a lover's knot it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking glass. So did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath the kettle. Supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked a fat swan best and roasted whole. His palfrey was a brown as is a babe. There was a fry.
Okay, that's good. Palfrey is a kind of horse. I think it's more like a work horse. But anyway, more of the same, yeah.
So I'm getting the sense that he's like, I mean, he lives like an extravagant life.
Yes.
Compared to like nobility almost.
Yes.
Like he dresses with
Yeah.
fur and gold. Like he leads like a super like extravagant lifestyle.
Yeah.
Especially for a monk or
He's a big guy too, which indicates that alone indicates that you're wealthy. You're not, and he's not pale. He's brown because he's outdoors. He's hunting. He's not pale. And the word cloister, that refers to those little cells. I don't know why they call them cells, but we think of a jail cell. Monks would have rooms that they call cells. They spend a lot of time indoors, and you will learn more about monks if you haven't yet, and why they did that. And I think the idea was good. Separate yourself from the world and focus on God. I think the idea was pretty good. So looks like we're being beckoned out there. So note where we finish. Remember for tomorrow, be prepared for a quiz. Be prepared for a quiz. Make sure you've answered the questions. So one way or the other, you'll be prepared. You read it, answer questions, whatever we do tomorrow, and we will talk about it. So tomorrow will be Peace Child.
I thought we were reading the questions.